My heart raced in my chest. The familiar beat, now erratic, almost as if it were trying to escape my body. It wasn't panic, not yet. But something about the stillness in the air, the sterile smell of antiseptic, the faint hum of the air conditioning told me that this moment was going to change everything. I could feel the weight of my own breath, shallow and caught in my throat, as I sat there. This wasn't just any doctor's visit. This was the moment when everything I'd built, everything I had stood for, would unravel in front of me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, sat across from me, her gaze cold and steady, too steady. She knew exactly what she was doing. "You cur not well, Jack," she said, her voice smooth, calculated, like she had rehearsed the words 1,000 times. "I think it's time we had you committed." At first, the words didn't register. I blinked, as if I could shake them from my mind. But they lingered, stinging and cold, cutting through my thoughts with precision. Committed? The accusation hit me like a slap. Mentally unstable? I looked at her, really looked at her. Sitting there, her posture perfect, her eyes gleaming with something darker than concern. My son Ryan was beside her. But his eyes, they were empty, distant. The man I had raised, the man who should have stood by me, was silent, frozen. I felt the room close in, the walls that had once held the laughter of family gatherings, the quiet comfort of old memories now seemed like a prison. The air grew thicker with every breath I took. Charles, my old army psychologist, sat beside me, my ally, the one man who had seen me through the darkest days of my life. But now he wasn't my ally. Not anymore. His gaze shifted uncomfortably from Jessica to me, then back again. There was a tension in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. The words hit me again, a slow burn of humiliation. "We need to get him checked," Jessica continued, her voice soft and assured. "For the safety of the family." A cold knot formed in my stomach. She wasn't just accusing me, she was orchestrating something much worse. She was dismantling everything I had worked for. My legacy, my reputation, everything I had built was now in question. It wasn't just an accusation, it was a calculated move, one that would tear me apart, piece by piece. My thoughts swirled in a chaotic storm. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second stretching into an eternity. Tick, 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 tick. My mind raced, but it was as if time had slowed to a crawl. How had it come to this? How had I let myself become the target of her game? I looked at Dr. Charles again, hoping for something, anything. A word of reassurance, a sign that he hadn't been swayed by Jessica's manipulation. But he only nodded, as if in agreement, his face pale, conflicted. This man had helped me survive the worst of war, but now he sat silent, watching as my life was being ripped apart. His hesitation spoke louder than any words. "Jack," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it sets for the best. You said been so unpredictable lately." I wanted to shout, to scream, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I felt the weight of my silence. The silence of a man who had trusted too much, who had believed that family could never turn on him. I stood up suddenly, the chair scraping against the floor with a screech, my hands clenched into fists. But it wasn't the kind of anger that burns with quick violence. It was the cold, sharp anger of someone who realizes they've been caught in a web they didn't even see coming. Jessica's eyes glinted with satisfaction, the mask of concern slipping just enough to reveal the true monster beneath. She had won. At least that's what she thought. As I turned to leave the room, I felt a flash of something deep within me, a spark, a fury. No, I wouldn't go down like this. I would fight. I would expose her lies. I would take back what was mine. Ryan didn't speak. He just stared at the floor, and that was all I needed to know. My son, the man I had loved and protected, had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. The days after that meeting bled together in a haze. The betrayal I'd felt that day had turned into something deeper, something darker, like a black hole pulling everything inside of me. I couldn't focus. I couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of Jessica's words crushing me. Mentally unstable, she'd said it so casually, as though she had already decided my fate, as though the man I had been for my entire life, the soldier, the father, the husband, was now a mere ghost. I woke up at 3 a.m., the silence of the house pressing in on me, my thoughts running a million miles an hour. My heart hammered in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was suffocating. How could she do this to me? How could my own flesh and blood betray me like this? I rolled over in bed, trying to escape the thoughts that haunted me. But sleep wouldn't come. Not when every corner of my mind was consumed by the image of Ryan's blank stare, his silence. How could he believe her? How could he not see through the manipulation? I got up, paced through the dark hallway, my mind a whirl of frustration. Every step felt like I was walking through a fog. Every breath felt heavy, like I was trying to drag myself through quicksand. The man I thought I was, the strong, dignified man, was slipping through my fingers. I couldn't let this stand. I couldn't let Jessica destroy me without a fight. But as I stood there in the dark, my reflection staring back at me from the glass of the living room window, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Was I the man who fought for his country, who served with honor, or had I become the broken man Jessica wanted me to be? I wasn't sure how long I stood there, lost in my thoughts. But I knew one thing: I couldn't let this go. Not anymore. It wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about who I had become. The morning light came too soon. The hours had melted away, and I hadn't slept a wink. The phone beside me buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. I glanced at it, my hand trembling slightly. A text from Dr. Charles. "We need to talk. I can't keep pretending this isn't happening. Meet me at the office." I swallowed hard. Dr. Charles, my ally, the man who had seen me through war, through PTSD, and now, it seemed, through the quiet unraveling of my life. He had known me when I was at my lowest, and now he was seeing me at my lowest again. Only this time it wasn't the scars of battle that haunted me. It was my own flesh and blood turning against me. I grabbed my coat, barely noticing the cold air that hit my skin as I stepped outside. The city was quiet, too quiet for a morning. The streets were empty, just the hum of distant traffic in the background. But inside, my mind was anything but still. My thoughts were chaotic, like shards of glass, sharp and jagged, stabbing into my consciousness with every passing second. When I arrived at Dr. Charles's office, I found him sitting behind his desk, his hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. He wasn't the same man I'd once known, the one who had held my life together in those dark days. He was a man who had seen too much, a man who had watched too many people fall apart. "You're not crazy, Jack," Dr. Charles said, without greeting me, his voice low, almost weary. It was like he had been waiting for me to say it first. But I couldn't even begin to voice what was going through my mind. Instead, I sank into the chair across from him and let out a long, heavy breath. The weight of everything Jessica had done, the lies, the manipulation, it was crushing me. "I never thought she'd set go this far," I muttered, my voice hoarse. "I never thought my own son—" Dr. Charles didn't respond. He just nodded, his eyes filled with a kind of quiet understanding. We both knew the truth. Jessica wasn't just trying to destroy me. She was trying to take everything I had, my family, my wealth, my legacy. She was trying to erase me from the picture entirely. "I need your help, Doc," I said, the words barely escaping me. "I need to take this fight back to her. But I can do it alone." He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the window. The world outside seemed so far away, but in here it was like we were trapped in the storm, just the two of us standing in the eye of it. "You've always been a man of discipline, Jack. But this is something else," Dr. Charles said quietly. "You're going to have to play this carefully. One wrong move, and she'll have you tied up in knots. A step in, but you need to be prepared." Prepared. It was the word that echoed in my mind as I left his office. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I wasn't just going to win this battle. I was going to destroy her. The quiet was unbearable. After that meeting with Dr. Charles, I couldn't stop thinking about the word he used carefully. It kept echoing in my mind like a mantra, reminding me that this wasn't going to be a simple fight. This wasn't about getting my name cleared. No, I needed to go deeper. I had to rebuild everything: my reputation, my family's trust, my legacy. And for that, I needed a plan. One that would hit Jessica exactly where it hurt. A plan that, when executed, would leave no room for doubt about who the real villain was. I spent the next few days in a haze. The house felt too big, too silent. Every room seemed to be haunted by the ghosts of a life I no longer recognized. I walked the halls aimlessly, trying to focus, trying to figure out where to start. It was like staring into a black abyss and wondering which direction to take. But as the days dragged on, I knew one thing. I couldn't just sit there and wait for her to destroy me. I had to act. The first step was gathering evidence. I hired a private investigator, a man named Hank, one of the best in the business. A quiet guy built like a brick wall but sharp as a tack. He didn't ask questions, didn't bat an eye at the things I needed him to do. He was a professional, and that's exactly what I needed. I met him at a quiet bar one evening, the kind that smelled like stale beer and old leather. He slid into the booth across from me, a man of few words, but when he spoke, I listened. "So, what are we looking at here, Carter?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "Jessica," I said, leaning in. "She's been hiding something. I don't know what it is yet, but I need you to dig deep. I need you to get into her finances, her past, anything that connects her to something dirty. She's been manipulating everyone, and I's not letting her get away with it." Hank nodded, his expression unchanged. He didn't need to ask more. He didn't need to know my reasons. He just needed to do his job. "Consider it done," he said, sliding a business card across the table. "I still keep you updated." I slipped the card into my pocket, a small weight lifting from my chest. I had taken the first step. Now I had to wait, but waiting was torture. Every day felt like I was being suffocated by time. Jessica was getting more confident, more brazen. She'd start calling more often, checking in on me under the guise of concern, but I could hear it in her voice, the calmness of someone who knew they were winning. My son Ryan barely called. It was as if he were slipping further away, becoming more of a stranger to me with each passing day. But I couldn't let that affect me. I had to focus on what was in front of me, on what I could control. I kept a low profile. No more outbursts, no more confrontation. I needed to move in the shadows, like a ghost in my own house. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't even remember how I passed the time. I just knew that I had to be careful. Every step, every move. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. Not now. Then, one evening, the call came. It was Hank. "We've got something," he said. "A wire transfer from an account in your name, and it sets not just any account. This one leads straight to a shell company, nothing but red flags. It sets a tangled mess of transactions." My heart skipped a beat. Jessica had been siphoning money out of my accounts, not just small amounts either. Big transfers, and they weren't going anywhere that made sense. "Keep going," I said, trying to steady my breath. I could feel the walls closing in, the trap tightening. "There resets more. The name on the account doesn't that much yours, but it sets connected to her. I sets digging deeper, but this is enough to start with." I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The plan was coming together piece by piece. Jessica had been playing a dangerous game, and now the tables were turning. I just had to be patient. As I hung up the phone, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I had what I needed to start the real fight, and once the evidence started piling up, there would be no way for her to hide. I would expose her for what she truly was. This wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about taking back control of my life, my family, my legacy, and Jessica. She would regret the day she ever crossed me. The days following Hank's discovery felt like a slow burn. I kept my movements deliberate, calculating, always careful not to raise suspicion. The house was quieter than ever, and Jessica's visits were becoming more frequent. Each time she called or showed up, I saw the same arrogant smile on her face, as if she knew she had already won. But what she didn't know was that I was watching her. Every step, every word, every move she made was now under my scrutiny. I was no longer the man she could manipulate from the shadows. I was a man preparing for war, a man with a plan. I started with small confrontations. Nothing too obvious, but enough to gauge her reactions. I had learned a long time ago that people reveal themselves when they think they're in control. And Jessica? She thought she was in control of everything. She thought she had Ryan. She thought she had me cornered. One evening, I bumped into her in the kitchen. She was arranging flowers, her back to me. The familiar scent of her perfume filled the room, but there was something else beneath it. Something that smelled like desperation. "You know, Jack," she said, without turning around. "I've been thinking, maybe you should take some time away. You know, just to clear your head. For the sake of the family, of course." I could feel my blood begin to boil, but I kept my voice calm, controlled. "I said not the one who needs a vacation, Jessica. But maybe you said we're right. It might be good for you to take a step back. You said been pushing people away lately. Done said you think it's such its time to reflect on your actions." She stiffened at the challenge in my voice. I could almost hear her teeth grinding as she forced herself to turn and face me. "Don't talk to me like that," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "You sept been acting strange, Jack. You sept to not well, and I sept am trying to help you." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "I don't set need your help, Jessica. What I need is for you to stop playing games." Her face flushed with anger, but she quickly masked it with a thin smile. "I sep am just looking out for the family." The conversation ended there. But the seed was planted. She was on edge, and that was exactly where I needed her. The next step was to test the waters with Ryan. I hadn't spoken to him much since that day at Dr. Charles's office. I had tried calling, but each time he either didn't answer or gave me short, distant responses. But I knew I had to break through. I caught him alone one evening, sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkening sky. His posture was slumped, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He was my son. I had raised him, loved him, and now I was being forced to fight for his trust. "Ryan," I said, sitting next to him, "we need to talk." He didn't know to look at me, but his shoulders tensed. "About what, Dad?" I paused, gathering my thoughts. "About Jessica." That caught his attention. He finally turned to look at me, his expression guarded. "What about her?" "You stare blind to what she steps doing," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "She steps been lying to you, Ryan. Manipulating you, you can see it, but I can. And I steps telling you, you need to wake up before it steps too late." He shook his head, clearly frustrated. "I sept not getting into this again. You stirred not crazy, Dad. But Jessica seps right about one thing, you need help." The words hit me harder than I'd expected. It was the same as it had been in Dr. Charles' office. My own son standing on the other side, believing the lies. "I don't need help," I said, my voice cracking slightly despite myself. "What I need is for you to stop listening to her and start seeing the truth." Ryan stood up, shaking his head. "I can do this right now." He turned and walked away, leaving me sitting there in the quiet darkness. The weight of the conversation lingered in the air, suffocating. But I couldn't give up. Not now, not when everything was so close. The pieces were coming together. I had gathered enough evidence to expose Jessica's lies, her financial deceit, and her manipulation. But I wasn't ready to pull the trigger just yet. I had to make sure I had everything locked down. I began securing my wealth, transferring assets, moving funds, and ensuring that everything I owned was protected. I couldn't afford to let Jessica take anything from me. Not now. Not after everything I'd fought for. And with each move, each piece of evidence I collected, I could feel the power shift back into my hands. Jessica didn't know it yet, but her time was running out. The day I'd been waiting for had finally arrived. The pieces were in place, the evidence undeniable. Everything Jessica had done, her manipulation, her lies, her financial games, it was all laid bare in front of me, ready to be exposed. The calm before the storm had passed. Now it was time to move. I called Ryan that morning, but as usual, there was no answer. I had tried to reach him for days, but every time he'd shut me out. It hurt more than I cared to admit, but I couldn't focus on that. Not now. Jessica had become the focus of my every thought, and I couldn't afford to let my emotions cloud my judgment. I met Hank that afternoon at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place no one ever noticed unless they were looking. It was my favorite spot. Quiet, secluded, perfect for business. Hank slid into the booth across from me, his expression as stoic as always. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You've got everything?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Got the goods. Wire transfers, fake accounts, shell companies, everything you need to nail her." He slid a thick folder across the table, the contents of which had the power to destroy everything Jessica had worked for, everything she'd hidden. The truth was now in my hands, and it felt damn good. I flipped through the pages quickly, the words on the documents confirming what I had suspected all along. Jessica had been siphoning money from my accounts, large sums hidden behind layers of deception. She'd been playing me, playing Ryan, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. But I wasn't going to expose it all at once. No, I had to be strategic. Jessica had to know that this wasn't just about money. It was about something deeper. It was about everything she'd taken from me. "I will need you to get into her records." I told Hank, "the house, the deeds, everything. I said I'm going to hit her where it hurts most." Hank raised an eyebrow but didn't ask any questions. He didn't need to. He knew the stakes. "Consider it done," he said, before standing and walking out of the cafe as quietly as he'd come. I watched him go, then looked back down at the folder in front of me. The quiet of the cafe felt too peaceful, too serene for what was about to happen. But I couldn't allow myself to second guess. This was it. This was the moment I had been building toward. That evening, I set the stage. I made sure everything was ready, my documents, the evidence, the proof of her lies. I made sure Ryan was nowhere to be found, knowing that this moment would be too much for him. It wasn't just about exposing Jessica. It was about shattering the image she had carefully crafted. When the time came, I sent Jessica a message. "I know everything. Meet me at the house. We need to talk." She responded almost immediately, her tone more guarded than usual. "I don't know what you think you know, Jack, but I'm not afraid of you." Her arrogance was infuriating. She thought she had control. She thought I was the one cornered. But tonight I would make sure she knew who had the upper hand. I arrived at the house before her. Every step I took heavy with purpose. The grand living room seemed colder tonight, the silence stretching long, too long, but I didn't feel cold. I felt fire. When she walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors, I didn't say a word at first. I just watched her, her confident stride faltering just slightly as she realized something was different. "What is this, Jack?" she asked, her voice icy but with an edge of uncertainty. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to the desk and pulled out the documents Hank had provided me, laying them out in front of her one by one. "This," I said, my voice low but steady, "is everything yours been hiding. Every lie, every scheme. It sits all here, Jessica." Her face went pale as she saw the evidence spread before her. The wire transfers, the fake accounts, the forged signatures. It was all there, each document damning her further. She took a step back, her mouth working but no words coming out. For the first time, she seemed small, vulnerable. She had no power now. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her usual composure slipping away. "This is all you don't said understand." I let the silence stretch between us, watching her squirm. "No, Jessica. I understand perfectly. You were using me, using Ryan, using this whole family, but you won us to get away with it. Not anymore." She tried to collect herself, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew she was cornered. "You can't prove anything," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "I don't need to prove anything," I replied. "You've already done that for me. All I need is for Ryan to see the truth, for him to finally understand who you really are." Her expression shifted. There was fear now, fear I hadn't seen in her before. Don't sit, tell him," she pleaded. "Please, I was just trying to protect us, to protect our future." "You've already ruined that future," I said, the finality of it ringing in the air. "This is your doing, Jessica. And now Youssef are going to face the consequences." Her facade cracked. She knew it was over, but I wasn't done yet. And I'm giving you a choice, I continued, my voice cold. You can walk away from all of this and I settle spare Ryan from the truth. Or you can keep fighting and I settle make sure the world knows exactly who you are. Your choice. The days after that confrontation with Jessica passed in a blur. The calm I had felt when I walked away from her shattered expression faded into a heavy sense of anticipation. The next move was coming. The final stage of my plan was nearly here. But this time I wasn't just waiting, I was preparing. I spent hours in my study, surrounded by the documents, the receipts, the tapes, everything that would prove Jessica's guilt. Every piece of evidence had to be meticulously organized, every transaction cross-checked, every lie exposed. I couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Hank, he had been working around the clock, digging into Jessica's past, securing more information to strengthen the case. But the silence in the air made my heart beat faster, knowing the endgame was near. I picked up the phone. Jack, Hank's voice crackled through the line. I've got the final piece, the deed for the house. It's in her name, not Ryan's. You were right. She's been playing both sides. She's been trying to secure ownership of everything, including the house. This isn't just about money. It's about control. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just a fight over money anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. This was about a woman who had used her charm, her lies, and her manipulation to stake a claim on everything I had ever worked for. And now it was all coming to light. Make sure you keep it secure, Hank. I need it for the final showdown. The time for waiting was over. The evidence was in hand, and now I needed to move. But I had to be careful. If I went public too soon, if I exposed everything too quickly, I risked giving Jessica time to cover her tracks, to fight back. No, I had to be patient. I made my way to Dr. Charles's office the next morning. I hadn't spoken to him since that day in the cafe. I knew he had his doubts about me, about what I was doing, but I needed him. This final battle wouldn't be easy. Jessica had too many people on her side, too many allies willing to help her cover her tracks. Dr. Charles was sitting behind his desk when I walked in. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that told me he understood the weight of what was coming. Jack, he said quietly, his voice steady, you know what's at stake. This isn't just about clearing your name. It's about your family, your legacy. I know, I said, feeling the weight of his words sink in. But I can just stand by and let her take everything. I worked my whole life for this, Doc. For my family. For Ryan. And now she's trying to tear it all apart. She has to pay for what she's done. Dr. Charles didn't respond right away. He just nodded, his gaze heavy with unspoken understanding. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was also a strange calm. I wasn't doing this out of anger anymore. I was doing it because it was the only way to restore balance, to protect what was mine, what I had earned, and what I had worked my whole life for. I'd spoken to my legal advisor, I continued, my voice firm. I'd ready to take this to court. We got everything we need. Then Dr. Charles leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. You are sure about this? I nodded. There's no turning back now. It's time to end this. Ryan, the thought of him lingered in the back of my mind, like a shadow I couldn't shake. He had been distant for weeks, refusing to engage, refusing to see what was happening right in front of him. But this was the moment of truth. I had to expose Jessica in front of him, show him the truth of who she was, because if I didn't, he'd be lost to me forever. The following days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and legal preparations. My advisor was working tirelessly to ensure that everything was in place for the courtroom showdown. Every document had to be ready. Every witness had to be prepared. I found myself standing in front of my family home one evening, just staring at it. The house where I had raised my son, where we had shared our lives, where I had spent so many years building a life I thought was secure. And now, I was about to lose it all, or at least that's what Jessica thought. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not like this, not when I had already given so much. The final battle was coming. I could feel it in the air, like the quiet before a thunderstorm, the calm before the storm. The courtroom was cold, a stark contrast to the heat that had been building inside me for months. The walls were lined with the faces of strangers, each one watching, waiting for the truth to be revealed. And then there was Jessica, sitting at the defense table, her posture perfect, a smile playing on her lips like she was still in control. She had no idea that everything she had built was about to come crumbling down. Ryan sat beside her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of indifference that hurt more than I was willing to admit. My son, my flesh and blood, had spent months listening to her lies, her manipulation. But today, he would see the truth. I took my seat, the weight of the documents, the evidence, everything I had worked for, pressing down on me. My heart pounded in my chest, but there was no room for fear, not anymore. This was the moment of reckoning. I had spent too long waiting for it. The judge entered, and the room fell into a heavy silence. I watched as he took his seat, his gavel coming down with authority. This was it. The game was about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge said, his voice steady. We are here today to determine the validity of the accusations made by Mr. Jack Carter against his daughter-in-law, Jessica Carter. Mr. Carter, you may present your case. I stood up slowly, taking a moment to look at the faces in the room. Jessica's eyes flickered to me, then quickly darted away. She was trying to appear confident, but I could see the cracks in her facade. I cleared my throat, steadying my nerves. Your Honor, members of the court, I began. My voice calm, controlled. What I'm about to present isn't just a story of financial betrayal. It's not just about money or assets. This is about trust. This is about a woman who manipulated her way into my family, into my life, and used my own flesh and blood to destroy everything I've worked for. I could feel Jessica's gaze on me, her eyes sharp with contempt, but I ignored it. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for Ryan. I motioned for the first piece of evidence, Hank's findings. The documents were spread out on the table, each one more damning than the last. I could hear the soft rustling of papers as I picked up the first one. This is a series of wire transfers, I said, holding up the document for the court to see. Transfers that were made from my accounts to a series of untraceable shell companies. These funds weren't small, Your Honor. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, money that was siphoned out of my accounts without my knowledge or consent. The woman sitting at that table, Jessica Carter, was behind these transactions, and she did it with the intention of stealing from me and my family. I saw the reactions in the room, the murmurs, the gasps. They weren't expecting this, but it was just the beginning. I continued, detailing the financial records, the forged signatures, the fake accounts, all the ways Jessica had manipulated not only me but the entire family to secure control over my wealth. Then it was time for the final blow. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was about to say. I've been a soldier, a husband, a father. My life has been built on trust, on honor, and I'm not the kind of man who takes betrayal lightly. But this isn't just about money. This is about the very heart of my family, my son, Ryan. I never wanted him to find out like this, but it's the only way for him to see the truth. I turned to Ryan, who was sitting motionless, his eyes locked on the floor. He hadn't looked at me since the trial began. His silence had been deafening. Ryan, I said, my voice softening, I've spent my life trying to protect you. I never wanted you to know any of this. But this woman, your wife, your mother, has used you as a pawn. She's lied to you. She's manipulated you into believing I'm the one who's unwell, the one who's unstable. But it's her. She's the one who's been lying. She's the one who's been stealing from us. Ryan looked up at me then, his face a mixture of confusion, hurt, and something else I couldn't quite place. His eyes searched mine like he was trying to understand, trying to process the words I was saying. For a moment the room was still. Everything was hanging in the balance. Jessica says, face twisted in anger. This is ridiculous. You don't know what you talking about, she shouted. Standing up, her voice shrill. Jack Sepp's lost his mind. Sepp's lying to all of you. This is all a game to him. The room went silent again. I didn't flinch. I didn't react. This was it. The truth was out there. All that was left was for Ryan to see it. I turned back to the judge, who had been silently observing the proceedings. Your Honor, I said, I have brought all the evidence, everything Jessica has done to betray me, to manipulate my family. This is the truth. And I ask that justice be served. The judge nodded slowly, his gaze shifting between me and Jessica. He motioned for her to respond. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but this time no words came out. She was too busy trying to maintain her composure, but the cracks in her armor were already showing. The truth had finally been unleashed, and I wasn't Seth the only one who knew it. The trial was over. The evidence had been laid bare, and Jessica's mask had fallen, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The courtroom had been quiet, save for the murmur of whispers as the judge delivered his verdict. Jessica was guilty of everything. The wire transfers, the deception, the manipulation. The judge didn't hesitate. He ruled in my favor, stripping her of everything she had worked so hard to take from me. But as the gavel came down, sealing her fate, I didn't feel victorious. There was no triumphant sense of relief, no moment of elation. Instead, there was only silence and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. Ryan, my son, he had spent the entire trial with his head down, his hands clenched in his lap, unable to look me in the eye. When the judge had ruled in my favor, there had been no celebration. No, I told you so. Ryan just sat there staring at the floor, lost in his own world. I knew the truth now. Jessica had twisted him, played him like a puppet, using my absence as an excuse to weave a web of lies. But that didn't change the fact that he was still my son. And now, after everything, I didn't know where to go from here. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to face the house, the place where we had once laughed, shared meals, and made memories. Now it felt like a tomb. Every corner of it reminded me of what I had lost, and not just because of Jessica's betrayal. It was because of the gaping hole in my relationship with Ryan. I tried reaching out to him. I called, left messages, even sent him texts, but he wouldn't respond. It was as if he had retreated into himself, unable to deal with the weight of what had happened. I couldn't blame him. I knew I had to give him space, but it didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. I found myself sitting in the study late one night, staring at the same documents that had brought me here. The truth was out. The war was over. But what now? What was the point of it all, if it meant losing my son in the process? I heard the familiar sound of the front door creaking open, and I instinctively stood up, my heart racing. Was it him, Ryan? He walked into the room slowly, as if unsure of what to say. His face was pale, his eyes tired. There were no words at first, just the awkward, painful silence that had come to define our relationship over the past few months. Dad, he said finally, his voice thick, can we talk? I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat down, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of the son I had known, but there was still a distance between us, a chasm I wasn't sure how to cross. I don't know what to say, Ryan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything that happened, I didn't know what to believe. Jessica, she had me so convinced that you were the problem, that you were the one who needed help. But now I see it. I see what she did. My heart clenched at his words. The guilt, the shame, the heartbreak, everything I had felt over the past few months was all pouring out now. He wasn't angry. He wasn't accusing me. He was just lost. And I was the reason he was lost. I should have seen it, Ryan continued. I should have seen the signs. I'd been so blinded by her lies. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix anything, I said softly, my voice rough. But you do need to understand that I never wanted you to be caught in the middle. This was never about you. It was about Jessica. She used you, and I didn't know how to protect you from that. But you've got to trust me when I say, I've always had your best interests at heart. Even when I couldn't be there, I was trying to protect you from the truth. He looked up at me, his eyes searching my face as if trying to read something he had missed. For a long moment he didn't speak, and then finally he nodded. I know, Dad. I just don't know where we go from here. I don't know how to fix what settled's been broken. I sat down next to him, close but not too close. I didn't want to rush him. We both needed time. We still figure it out, I said, my voice steady. It won. Have to be easy. Got a lot of rebuilding to do, but we still do it together. There was a long pause, and then Ryan reached out, his hand resting on my shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It was never just about clearing my name or taking down Jessica. It was about restoring what had been lost. My relationship with Ryan, my place in this family, and that I realized was the true victory. The house was quieter now, but not in the way I had imagined it would be. After the trial, after everything was exposed and the dust settled, I expected peace. I expected some sense of triumph or relief, but there was nothing like that. Instead, it was an eerie kind of silence, the kind that comes after a storm has passed, but before the damage is fully realized. Ryan and I were on better terms. Sure, he was home more often, his presence no longer a ghost in the halls. We had dinner together some nights, even laughed a little, but the weight between us still lingered. It was an invisible barrier, unspoken, fragile. Every time I looked at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that the son I had raised wasn't the same, that maybe he would never be the same. I sat alone one evening in the study, the papers from the trial scattered in front of me. The case was closed. Jessica was out of the picture, and yet the scars of it all still felt fresh. I had won, yes, but at what cost? I had gotten my dignity back, my reputation intact, but there was a price for that, wasn't there? A price I hadn't seen until after it was too late. I had fought for my family, for my legacy, but in the process I'd nearly lost my son, the one person who should have stood by me, the one person I thought I could trust without question. And now, even though things were better, they weren't the same. I hadn't expected forgiveness. I hadn't even expected Ryan to come around so quickly, but I couldn't ignore the toll it had taken on both of us. The silence was the hardest part. It wasn't just the silence of the house. It was the silence between us. The quiet, awkward moments when I tried to reach out, when I tried to bridge the gap, but nothing seemed to work. I thought back to the day Jessica had stood in front of me in the courtroom, the look of panic on her face as the evidence piled up, the smug smile she had worn when she walked in, thinking she had won only to watch it all crumble before her eyes. That moment of justice had been sweet, yes, but in hindsight, it felt hollow. It felt empty. I couldn't help but wonder if this had been the only way to get back what I had lost. Had I taken the right path? Had I chosen justice, or had I chosen revenge? The truth was, I wasn't such sure. I stood up and walked over to the window, staring out into the quiet night. The moon hung low, casting a soft light over the yard, and for a moment I just stood there, letting the stillness settle around me. "You didn't lose me. You gave me away." The words echoed in my mind, a phrase I had heard long ago but never truly understood until now. It wasn't just Jessica who had given me away. I had given myself away too. In the pursuit of justice, I had lost pieces of myself. I had lost the trust of the one person I had always believed would understand me the most. The one person who should have been by my side. I thought of Ryan. The way his eyes had searched mine in that courtroom, the confusion in them as the truth settled in, the anger, the hurt, the feeling of betrayal that I had unknowingly passed on to him. I walked back to the desk and sat down, the weight of the world pressing in on me once again. The fight was over. The justice had been served, but at what cost? The silence between Ryan and me would take time to mend. It would take patience, more patience than I had left. But maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild. But as I sat there in the quiet, I understood one thing. No matter how much I fought for it, no matter how much I tried to make things right, there were some scars that would never fade, some wounds that would never heal. And maybe that was the price of justice. The years passed, and life slowly began to find its rhythm again. The aftermath of the courtroom battle, of Jessica's betrayal, of the family I thought I'd lost, it all started to fade into the distance. But that doesn't mean the scars disappeared. They were there, hidden beneath the surface, only visible when I let my guard down. Ryan had grown, matured in ways I hadn't expected. We'd rebuilt what we could, but the trust between us, the bond we once shared, was forever changed. And while things weren't perfect, we were learning to live with the new reality. I watched him from the doorway as he worked on his car in the garage. The same garage I had taught him in, where we had spent hours working together, side by side. The faint sound of the engine hum, the smell of motor oil. It all brought back memories of a time when we were closer. But even now, as I stood there watching him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. He had forgiven me, but I hadn't forgiven myself. Not fully. One day I found myself standing in the same study where the battle for my legacy had begun. The same desk, the same worn chair. I looked out the window at the sprawling backyard, at the life I had fought so hard to keep, and for the first time, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Maybe it was the years that had passed, the constant work I'd put into rebuilding my life. Maybe it was the knowledge that Jessica had long faded from our lives, no longer a threat, no longer a shadow over my family. I took a deep breath and walked over to the shelf, pulling down the box that had been sitting there untouched for so long. It was full of old photographs, memories of my time in the army, my time with Ryan when he was still a boy, before the world had turned upside down. I flipped through the pages, each photo a reminder of what once was and what had been lost. My heart ached as I saw Ryan's younger self, smiling, carefree. He had been my whole world, and now, looking at him as the man he had become, I realized that the boy I had raised would always be with me. But he wasn't sent the only thing I had to hold on to. I closed the box with a quiet resolve and set it back on the shelf. The past was done, the fight was over, and now I had to live with what was left. The lessons I had learned, the price I had paid, it had all shaped me. I walked into the kitchen, where Ryan was sitting, sipping coffee, looking more like a man than the boy I had once known. He looked up as I entered, his eyes tired but warm. There was no more distance between us, not like there used to be. "You good?" he asked, his voice softer now, more understanding. I nodded, sitting down across from him.
Yeah, I'd step him good.
We didn't say much more after that, but it didn't matter. There were no words left to speak, no more battles to fight. In the quiet of the morning, with the sun rising outside, I finally understood. Justice had been served, and with that, a new chapter had begun. But the price of that justice, the cost of the betrayal, the fight, it had left its mark. The scars would always be there, but I had earned the right to live my life on my own terms, to rebuild what was broken, and that, in the end, was enough. "You didn't lose me," I whispered softly to myself, thinking of Jessica, of the past. "You gave me away." It had been several years since the trial, since Jessica's betrayal, since the family had been torn apart by lies. Time had a way of healing wounds, but not all wounds are meant to heal completely. Some remain as scars, reminders of the battles fought, the truth exposed, and the people left behind. Ryan had grown as I knew he would. His business was thriving, and he was starting a family of his own. I could see the man he had become, a reflection of the lessons he had learned, both from me and from the mistakes we'd both made. But there were still quiet moments. Moments when I saw the flicker of the boy he used to be, the boy I had raised to be strong, to be honorable, to understand what family meant. And in those moments I was reminded that despite everything, despite the betrayals and the heartbreak, there was something worth saving. My relationship with him was different now. Strained, but healing. We had learned to coexist in a new reality, one where we could share memories without resentment, laugh without guilt. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I spent my days in the garden, working with my hands, planting new life in the place where old memories had once been. The earth was a constant, a reminder that even when things fall apart, something new can always grow in its place. The house, once a symbol of everything I had fought for, had become a sanctuary, not just for me, but for Ryan and his family when they visited. It was no longer just a battlefield. It had transformed into a place of quiet reflection, of peace. I still had the scars from the past, though. Every time I walked through the halls, I was reminded of how far I had come, and how far I still had to go. I had learned to forgive, but forgetting was another thing altogether. I had been betrayed by the woman I once trusted, by my own son who had been pulled into her lies. But now, as I sat in the quiet of the evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew one thing for certain. I had rebuilt. The sound of Ryan's car pulling into the driveway broke my thoughts. He was home again. As he walked through the door, his face lit up, just a little. The tension that had always hung in the air between us was gone. It wasn't gone in a grand way, not with grand gestures or apologies. It was just quieter. He walked over to where I was sitting on the porch, leaned against the railing, and looked out at the yard. "Dad," he said, his voice steady. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what happened. And I just want you to know that have learned from it, from everything." I turned my head, meeting his eyes. I saw sincerity in them, no more confusion, no more doubt. It was a simple moment, but it meant everything. "I know, son," I replied softly. "I've learned too, we all have. And that's all we can do. Learn, move forward." Ryan nodded, and for the first time in years there was no weight on my chest, no lingering resentment. It wasn't forgiveness that fixed things. It was time, time for the truth to settle in. Time for the wounds to be acknowledged. Time for new memories to be made. We sat in silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, the sound of birds in the distance, a gentle reminder of life continuing. The world didn't stop for anyone, and neither should we. Ryan turned to me, his face softening, the lines of stress that had once been etched deep into his features now faded. "Thanks, Dad, for everything," he said quietly. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. "You stir welcome, son," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "You didn't lose me. You gave me away." It had been years since the trial, and in those years life had gone on. Not the same, of course. Life never goes back to exactly what it was before a storm hits. But time has a way of softening the edges of pain, of reshaping our memories into something more bearable. The house was quieter now, filled with the sounds of new life, of laughter from Ryan's children, of peaceful moments that I never thought I would experience again. It was strange to think that this place, once a battlefield, had transformed into a home again. But it had, slowly, bit by bit. There were times, late at night, when I would sit on the porch, the cool evening air brushing against my face, and I would think back to the day everything had fallen apart. I would remember Jessica's face in the courtroom, the panic in her eyes when the truth started unraveling. I would remember the way Ryan had looked at me, torn between loyalty to his wife and the overwhelming evidence of the lies she had spun. I'd remember how it had all felt like a dream, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart while I stood powerless. But then I would remind myself of one thing. It had been worth it, not just for the victory, but for the lessons learned along the way. Jessica had been a part of my life for a long time. She had been like a daughter to me, and the betrayal had cut deeper than I ever could have imagined. But I had survived. I had come out the other side of it, battered but unbroken. The woman who had tried to destroy me had been exposed for what she truly was, and justice had been served. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been pretty, but it had been necessary. And then there was Ryan. My son, the one person who had made everything worth it. The one person who, despite everything, had given me a chance to rebuild. The pain of what we had gone through together, of the distance that had formed between us, would never truly go away. But in time we had found a way to heal. I had learned to let go of the anger, to forgive, and maybe, just maybe, Ryan had learned the same. I walked through the house, my fingers grazing the walls, the familiar warmth of it all bringing a strange sense of peace. The pictures on the walls, the bookshelves lined with memories, the old armchair where I used to sit and read with Ryan when he was a boy, all of it was a reminder of who we were and who we had become. I knew there were still battles ahead. Life doesn't stop after one fight, after one victory. There would always be challenges, always more to face, but I wasn't afraid of that anymore. I had faced the hardest fight of my life and survived. I was no longer the man I had been when the story began. I had changed, I had learned that the fight for justice was not just about winning, it was about holding on to the things that matter most: family, honor, integrity. And those were the things I had fought for, things I had almost lost but in the end had regained. I sat down on the porch, the same place where I had spent so many nights in silence, thinking about what was lost. But now, as I looked out at the horizon, I didn't feel the weight of regret. I didn't feel the ache of loss. I felt something else, something I hadn't expected. Peace. The fight was over. The battle had been long and the cost had been high, but the lessons I had learned would stay with me for the rest of my life. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I knew that I had done what needed to be done. I had fought for what was right, and in the end, that was enough. You didn't lose me, I whispered again, the words now an echo of what I had learned along the way. You gave me away.